Welcome to today's session. I've got Kevin Hagemoser with me here, and I'm very excited to have Kevin on with me today. Kevin and I actually met at the IT Nation Grow event last year, and we ended up talking afterwards a few times actually. And I think that the topic that we have for today is really interesting and important. It's one that we have had zero coverage on so far, and so I like that because we won't, Kevin, we won't be repeating anything that we have already. Kevin is a pro at operations and specifically a COO, and he will talk to you a little bit more about that. And his expertise lies with MSPs. My name is Hartland Ross, and I'm the president of eBridge Marketing and the host broker. You've probably seen a couple of our sessions before, so I won't spend a lot of time introducing myself, but as you probably have already been to our site, but we publish a list of companies every week for sale in the IT services space. It comes out Wednesdays and is free to subscribe. We also do take requests, a little bit like DJs. We have a wish list that you can subscribe to tell us what you're looking for, and if and when we have an opportunity that's a match, we will proactively reach out to you. So if you have any questions, please do reach out to us. Happy to have a conversation with myself or my team. You can email info@thehostbroker.com. So I'm going to just let Kevin introduce himself. And then I've got Kevin put some questions together for you that I think is going to be very interesting for our audience. So I'll hand it over to you to do a quick intro.
Yeah, thank you, Hartland. I appreciate the invite and being on the podcast amongst other MSP experts, leaders. That's great. I'll try to do my best to hold some weight here. And thank you for the host broker support as well. I'm an operations guru nut. No, not so much a guru, but just a real big fan of operations and entrepreneurship, and have been for many years. And I've been doing some work with leaders and visionaries for about since 2016, helping visionaries decrease the amount of overwhelm they have in their life. And I've been working specifically with MSPs for the last 2 years. So that's my story now. I'm taking the chance and letting you lead us down some paths. Hartland, thank you so much for doing that. And I look forward to answering some good questions.
Yeah, excellent. And I think, Kevin, if I can say to not compliment you too much, but to say something that I felt right from the beginning of our conversation is that you have you make a good doctor in your next life. You've got good bedside manner, and just the way you go about some of the questions and discussions that we had, I think is very confidence inspiring. So let me just start off with a question here that for those who have been a part of service leadership, that's Paul Dippel's kind of institution that he started. But there's this concept, and I assume Paul actually coined the phrase. I actually don't know that. Maybe you do. But this concept of operational maturity. And I wondered whether, it's thrown around, and some people may know what it means. Probably a lot of people do, but I'm sure there's some that don't. And I just wondered if you could talk a little bit about what does it mean when someone says your business is not as operationally mature as it could be, or as operationally mature as somebody else's. What does that actually mean? What's involved, and what are the types of things that you would work on with somebody who is looking to improve their operational maturity?
Yes, I do not know who coined the phrase, but I appreciate you kicking that over. I would say, for me, my experience has been more with Evolve and the peer groups around the other peer groups that are out there in the world. But the SLI specifically discusses operational maturity, and I am not an expert. I'm not a trained coach. I have some other buddies that I could refer you to if that's where you or your audience was interested. But I would say that it really just the fundamental, very simple level, like back of the napkin, conversation over a cocktail, is operational maturity looks like at the pinnacle, you are in a place where the operator, the owner, does not have to be involved in every decision, and they are not required to be QA in any way, and the leadership team has a management structure that allows them to take things that they want to do and changes that they want to implement in their organization and go down through the organization, as opposed to them having to do it all themselves, the leadership team or even at the ownership class level. And people that are at the pinnacle have it, what I would consider a very operationally mature organization. Ones that are below that are, most people are chaotic. They're doing things happenstance, putting out a lot of fires. So these are the two ends of the spectrum, and I'm doing a terrible job of actually trying to define this for you. But you can just type it into Google and you can actually see the entire structure of the operational maturity as it's outlined by SLI. But if if you explore that as an owner, that you want to be better at what you do in your organization, you're probably on some level on the operational maturity scale, and it goes from I think it's 1 to 5, 5 being the highest. Yeah. So yeah. I'm sorry, I'm not the perfect expert to ask about that, but I could find some people for that.
Well, I think it sets the stage, right, for the stepping stones of the work that you do, right, is to move up that ladder and help MSP owners become more operationally mature by and we'll talk about it by systematizing and putting process and procedures in place and improving efficiency. So maybe another good question here is just to start off with. Our next question is some of the challenges that MSP owners are facing today, and there's a lot, right? But if you were to pick, if there's one glaring one, great. If you think there's sort of like the top 3 challenges that MSP owners are facing, what are you seeing those being, and what are the impacts?
I think that with the last IT Nation Grow event, Peter Kajawa spoke about the size of the market, of the MSP market, and I think he had a number somewhere around 70 to 80% of the businesses that are MSPs are under $2 million, maybe even under $1 million of recurring annual revenue. And so when I think about answering that question, I'm going to try to do it for the middle of the bell curve, where it says, what does most people deal with? And that'd be in that space, $2 million or so around there, and some deviation on either side of that. But I think that what they're struggling with is that how do you become an owner? How do you be an owner of a business and the technician and split your time between all the other things that a business owner has to do and still give good customer service? Because at the end, that's all we are, is MSPs, as customer service organizations that happen to serve their technology of our end user. My strongest support for people in my operations role is just how do I help them avoid a lot of overwhelm, and that comes from like putting things in the right boxes, and those come through systems, whether they be SLI or the entrepreneur operating system or those tools. That's probably my best value to them.
So I like the way you started off with defining the size of the MSPs, and I should have done a better job with my question, because it's a bit like, well, what's happening to the real estate market? And the real estate market is like, are you talking about commercial? Are you talking about residential? Are you talking about California? Are you talking about Florida? Are you talking about New York? Like there's a lot of variation. So I appreciate you sort of contextualizing the size of the business, because obviously businesses that are tens of millions of dollars are facing different challenges than the smaller ones. But for those that we speak with on a regular basis, they do tend to be in that sort of let's say 5 million in revenue, and then if you put a bell curve there, then that's kind of where you answered the question. So I appreciate that context, and so sort of relating to and segueing into the next question and relating to some of the things that you just said, how do MSPs break free from some of the day-to-day operations? So, I've certainly been on calls before where either the person has to cancel the meeting that I have, or they're like interrupting the call in the middle, or they have to leave because there's some kind of a fire. And we, cut our teeth in the web hosting industry, and is still very active in that space today. But it was not uncommon, especially in that space, for there to be even more fires. And so someone would just say in the middle of the meeting, sorry, Kevin, I have to go. And it just some DDoS attack would come out of nowhere and all hands on deck, right? So I guess just a question for you is sort of how does an owner move away from some of these day-to-day operations, and even if there is a fire, they are not firefighting. They are the chief sitting out in the street in the fire engine, kind of conducting the orchestra.
Sure. I think it comes from early preparation, and that's kind of like a no-duh answer, but the decision has to be made by the owner. Do I want to be in the firefighting mode? And everyone will say, and I'll put this across the board, people that I work with, no, of course I don't want that. But if given the shiny object of the fire versus the hard work of the strategic stuff that's got to be done in your business that has no reward and no pat on the back and no clear end, I mean, that sounds dreary and uninteresting, but that's the stuff that takes you from having to be involved in the fires every day to having the choice to actually grow your business because you have time to do it. So it's a trade-off. Like, you have to be frustrated generally. Someone has to go, I just don't like this anymore. This is not great. I had a goal to grow to 2.5 million ARR, and I've been at 1.2 for 4 years, and I can't do it. This is a frustrating situation. I know that my business, my family's security, my retirement depends on me doing this, but I haven't been able to draw myself out of this. And it's just how I show up in the space as an operations integrator, maybe a COO, that kind of role, and just say, hey, I'll show you a mirror. Do you want to see what you're doing and how you're impacting your organization? Because I can just show you, not in front of your staff, not in front of anybody that would make you embarrassed, but I'm going to show you what's happening. Do you want to change this? And they'll say, yes, I absolutely do. And I say, okay, then we have to put the plans in place, and we actually have to spend some time thinking about who would be doing that stuff if it wasn't you. And that is a very tough conversation for someone that's been working their business for 20 years, and they're the go-to person. They have a lot of pride in that, and I understand that. But if they want to grow, or ultimately maybe in the case for people that you run into, Harlan, is they want to sell, they can't be the business, or no one is going to buy it. And that's true both from the customer standpoint and also from an acquirer standpoint. If I call you and you're the one answering the phone and you're the owner every time, and I expect you, then you will never be able to extract yourself as if I'm your client, you'll never be able to extract yourself from this relationship. So how do you start building those frameworks of having first line of defense, and first conversations start with this, and tickets look like this, and only these tickets get to you, and when they ask for you, we do these steps first to make sure that the client is happy. Just those are the basic things to extract people from the phone call interrupting every meeting, which I have that with my MSP clients too.
Yeah, look, if I can speak from my own personal experience, I can very much relate, because my personal preference is I would rather have 10 small things to do. And it goes back to when I was in school. I would rather have 10 little assignments to do for school than one massive essay that was due at the end of the term that was worth like 50, 60, 70% of my mark. I'd rather just kind of chunk it out with little bits. And so if I turn this into like the business scenario, it's kind of the same way. Is you've got all these strategic objectives to try to accomplish. They're big things. They're not due tomorrow, and you're not accountable to anybody to do them. And so it's kind of the urgent versus the important, and you get attached to the urgent. And I think the other thing that strikes me that you had commented on was this idea of the pain, where someone kind of has had enough, right? And we see that on the sales side as well, where when someone wants to sell their business, is that someone says, well, look, hey, if someone wants to pay me some ridiculous amount of money, I'll sell my business. Well, that person's very happy in their business. Clearly, they're opportunistic, and if someone pays them a ridiculous amount of money, they'll take it. But they're not really for sale. But we have others who, for whatever reason, there's some reason that maybe they just and a burnout is the kind of most common one that we see, where that pain is so real that they just can't get themselves to kind of do another day or another week, another month, another year of the business. And maybe it's because they have been in the trenches for so long. But there's this concept that I learned a long time ago, which is that someone either they're moving away from something or they're moving towards something. And so you're moving away from the pain, or you're moving towards something, which is, well, I want to, I want to extricate myself from the business because I want to sell or something like that. There's different approaches there, but I think a few things, kind of aha moments for me came up while you're talking there. So you mentioned a minute ago EOS, and for me, I've learned about EOS and the other systems scaling up and so forth. Geez, like 15 years ago was probably when I first heard about them. And increasingly over the years, I'm hearing about them more and more businesses are using them in more and different industries and so forth. And I think it's still a nascent concept, but we're well out of the initial kind of early adopter phase, if you like.
Yeah.
And so lots of MSPs are familiar, but there are also a lot that aren't. And so I just wondered, and I know you're not an EOS implementer,
right.
But you work with EOS systems and implementers to implement what everybody, the one-page plan, and to have the right people on the right seats of the bus, right?
That's right.
And so to cite the Good to Great book. So maybe you could just talk a little bit about what are these systems, and why are we hearing so much about them, and why do people like them, and why should someone, an MSP owner, perhaps considering implementing EOS, whether they are self-implementing or hiring a third party?
Good questions. So a little bit, I'm not a extreme history buff in this, but I remember in college 100 years ago, reading the E-Myth and being very excited about this concept that doing something consistently was more important than doing something to perfection. And I get to take that into the work that I do today. But the trajectory looked like E-Myth, then it came EOS, as far as I was aware. Maybe there were scaling up and the things around the gazelles and Verne Harnish that the EOS concepts were built on. And right in the front of the book, it'll give homage to those things. In the front of Traction, EOS was written in 2008. It references these things and says that, they came from here. And so it wasn't particularly completely unique in its sense. It was bringing all the things together so people could finally use them. And I don't know where that ends, but I know there's a bunch of things being added onto that. It included new concepts around how do you blend some of these EOS and then the implementation and the integration and all the things along that line. And I'm happy to talk to anybody about that. I'm not going to give anybody the clear statement right this second. But my excitement around these things is that they do help real people, Harlan, is they actually allow people to get out of their own way and go, okay, I can focus on, instead of having the term paper that you were referencing earlier, the 20-page term paper, I can do some small parts of the term paper and feel successful and done with them to the degree that they need to be done for this quarter. And next quarter, we'll do some other piece of that. And by the time we get to the end of 2 years, hopefully we've captured 80% of the things that should be addressed. And that is the vision of EOS as it was written in the book Traction. Is it about 2 years? Most people graduate from the implementation and they can hold that water on their own, and they can become self-guards of those, ways to grow and the ways to improve their business. I am in the space to try to help people just stay on the straight and narrow, because it gets distracting with all the fires, undoubtedly. And running those consistent meetings, having scorecards, and having the ability to set on a quarterly basis actual goals, are also known as rocks in EOS. If you aren't doing those basic things, there's probably an unlikelihood that you will get a chance to grow your business and work on it instead of just inside it. So I hope that answers some of the pieces that you were referencing, but where EOS is in the spectrum of why people know about it, because people are frustrated, because it's solving a problem for people that don't have the time to work on their business, to do it in small chunks. And when your friends and your colleagues who run similar businesses get something done in your peer groups, for example, let's talk about that. The penetration of EOS and MSPs is pretty strong relative to other industries. I've said this multiple times, but I spent many years not focused on MSPs, and it was a struggle to even explain what certain operating systems were. I'd say 50% of EOS, 50% of MSPs use EOS. They know of it. Yes, a fair number could learn about it, but it was a better market penetration of the concept, and so they were looking for those solutions.
Interesting. I was quite surprised actually at the 50% number. We actually just recently added that question to the materials, the package that we put together for buyers to review and sellers to kind of present their businesses to.
And yeah, sorry to interrupt, but what was those results? Like, you feel like that's still less than 50%?
Well, we're now asking the question, and before we didn't ask the question is the point. So I didn't have a number, whether it was 50%, 20%, 80%. I just didn't know. But I'm surprised that you're saying it's 50. I would have thought it was significantly lower than that. But again, it's kind of, if we don't ask, we don't know, and so someone may well have been using EOS over the years, and we just we didn't know. So now we're calling it out, and I think the advantage there is for people who, and again, if you're not familiar with this language, that the idea is that, geez, well, if a buyer is using EOS and is bought into that system, and I can't remember if we defined the EOS is Entrepreneur's Operating System, is what it stands for. I'm not sure if we covered that. So
I probably skipped over that, assuming that everybody knows it because of the context in this, how we're talking about this industry.
Right.
So this is good. I'm seeing another side of the coin.
Yeah, and sometimes we kind of make too many assumptions. So so for somebody who's not familiar, that a buyer who runs their entire business on an Entrepreneur's Operating System will look favorably at another seller who is also on that system, because the team that they would potentially inherit would end up being trained on this mentality, this one-page plan, the rocks, and they would be able to take that type of a business over more easily than, because there's less of a cultural trauma, frankly, to have a buyer say, okay, well, this is what we're doing, and everybody's been kind of relaxed with no real management or oversight or systems in the past. So I think there's a real significance, and we've talked about scaling up. So these are just kind of competing, if you like, systems to accomplish the same goal. And different flavors of the same objective, and I had referenced the concept of self-implementing. It just means that you can go buy the book and download the files and basically try to do it yourself, or you can hire a coach who's certified to facilitate, and then you end up because if you self-implement, someone, typically the owner of the business, is going to have to run that. And now they're having to wear two hats. They're having to wear the hat of the facilitator of the session, plus they're having to wear the seat that they occupy, and so they kind of got flipped back and forth. Whereas they can be a participant in the session if they hire a third party to facilitate them. So.
Yeah, that's right. Great. EOS implementers, Entrepreneur Operating System. Thank you for clarifying that, and I'd like your perspective. Maybe I'm too myopic in the industry too much to not know that most people do it, but I'll give you a context of the IT Nation Grow event when I hosted we did a session on the Get It, Want It capacity, which is like the people component of EOS, and I asked who here is on EOS, and there was only 3 people that didn't raise their hand. So again, right, like I'm having observer's bias that I just assume everyone has heard of it and is using it, right? But I know that that's probably not the case. But the people that show up to those kinds of peer group events tend to be at a higher awareness.
You're right. I mean, it's I think you're preaching to the choir to some degree because with the people that are there, and so those watching this session will end up being from a variety of backgrounds. So, so I know we've covered some of this already, but I mean, what does a fractional COO do? And we've got got fractional CFOs, fractional CEOs, but what does a fractional COO do, and what benefits might an MSP expect to realize in their business? and so, and how do you kind of work with some of these systems we're talking about?
Sure. Thank you. I want to be really clear that I think the people do conflate the idea of what I call myself as an operations integrator or an operations support person. Yes, COOs, chief operating officer. I generally don't wear that title, but I can see where the people would assume that those things are similar, and that's no call out for you. It's just I think there's a place for all of them, and bigger organizations would probably looking towards a COO, someone that is really focused on the strategy and maybe less in the day-to-day ops. In the work that I do as an integrator, and that's a very specific term that's come about since Traction came around, but it's not proprietary. It's just it's specific to that tool. Is that I sit right below the visionary, the owner, and try to help with the operations and make sure that the blockades are knocked down and they can do what they do best, so that they love their business again, as well as allow their department heads to do what they're uniquely skilled and how their superpower is tuned to. That's what I hope that COOs do, but I don't know at the highest level if that's the case. So my focus, you can say fractional integrator, is just to come in and allow people to get the support they need in the operations, which means to be a yin to the yang of the visionary, which tends to be very quick start and all over the map.
Right.
Let's try anything. That's very whipsaw for most employees that sit below them and go, well, we're going to turn the widget from blue to green today. And then the next week we come in, well, now it's yellow. And you go, most employees can't handle that. They do need some consistency. And so I try to be the buffer between looking at way down the vision, way down the pipeline, and then also can we just keep the train on the track so that everyone's comfortable with what they're doing and they're good at what they do, so that we're not surprising them. And your technicians on the field aren't surprised every 5 minutes when you come up with a new idea. We should also be installing this, tool. We should also be doing these other 4 things. Well, okay, let's talk about that before we just spring that on them. Let's discuss what that looks like. What does a one-page rollout look like? That would be my role, to help keep people on the same team happy.
Yeah, no, great. Makes perfect sense. Obviously we're focused around putting buyers and sellers together, MSPs, and so big question, almost the first one that people ask is related to valuation. Either as a buyer, well, how much, what are you seeing MSPs sell for these days? How do I value an MSP? Sellers are saying, how do I drive the value of my MSP higher? What things should I focus on? What are some of the challenges that you see with my business that might reduce the value? So how, from your perspective, have you seen the systematization and the work that you do benefit the value of MSP? So, why should someone care effectively?
Yeah, well, and I applaud the work that you're doing. There isn't a single prospect or person I interact with the MSP level that isn't talking about this. Now, again, that might be a bias because I see the people that are looking for the carrot. You were talking about the pain or the bliss world, or the carrot or the stick option. You're running away from the stick or towards the carrot. There's a reason for them to be talking about things like, how do I increase my enterprise value? And what I can say is that most of them are unsure how that even looks. And so I think that's beautiful about Evolve and the peer groups around the whole country, other organizations that run those, is just helping people interact with each other and go, like, what have you heard? And let's share best practices. But total value probably is helped in operations just by going, the leadership at the ownership class level, they're going to lead. I don't care who's purchased it, who wants what they say in their buyout. They're like, yep, we'll keep you on for a year, or we'll provide you these things, or I will provide you training once you buy my business.
Yeah.
It's always shortened way beyond the expectation, because it's really hard to have 2 cooks in the same kitchen, especially at the ownership level. And so it's easy to move on. If you've got ops support and you've had it for a while, someone like myself, and you're running on an operating system, whether it be scaling up or EOS, you can walk away without the whole ship going down, because it has systems and things that have been in place for hopefully years. And that's the enterprise value. There's consistency across time.
Well, and then also, of course, systematization means the removal of the reliance on the owner. So the owners needs to be less involved during that transition or for a shorter period of time. And then also there's a bit of a safety net in there because as you said, too many cooks in the kitchen, and it's hard for any owner who's been calling the shots now forever to all of a sudden be reporting to somebody else. And so as much as they might understand that intellectually, when it comes to implementing it and accepting the direction, or somebody makes it, the owner, the new owner, the buyer, makes a decision on something that they don't agree with, then they kind of got to bite their lip because they really don't have any say. And so if that relationship starts to fall apart, for whatever reason, and I'm not talking about where it's where there's animosity necessarily, but just in a sort of a functional way, that where the seller says, you know what, it's not quite the vision that I thought it was going to be here, and you know, they don't even really value my opinion anymore. I think I'm just going to pull back. If the systems are there, then this is not as big a consequence. And if the systems are not there, then now the buyer's got to continue to work with this seller who's not overly motivated or happy at this stage. And again, it may not be anything necessarily that the buyer has done wrong. It's just the seller has kind of come to realize that their baby is no longer their baby anymore, and they need to let go. And it's hard. So you know, I think this is some of the value. And then of course, because of that, there's less risk to the buyer. And so then the buyer is willing to pay more for the business, right?
Yeah, I think that there's some really key places where the transaction is going to get stalled out when the current owner and the future owner look at each other and go, well, you do either most of the sales, so it's almost entirely owner-led sales, or you are the culture of this entire organization. If you leave, I think half of your team might leave. And that happens in a very patriarchal kind of business where the owner is very charismatic, and that's great. But when they don't have any department heads that are also have good relationships with their team members and trust them as leaders, not just the one leader at the top, that is going to impact enterprise value. And due diligence will prove that out certainly before the sale ever, probably crosses the finish line. And then you have that fight between the two owners, or not that fight, but just at least the friction between two people that have one handing off the baton and one accepting the baton. That hopefully is something that you probably help them with, at least on some levels. It's like, evaluate, is this the culture that you can take over? And people that don't have it, and it looks like a very much king ruling the land environment, that becomes really hard to make a good, that's not really a good target for purchase in my experience. And operating systems mitigate some of that, but not all of that. And certainly if you have an operations person like myself, in addition to using an operating system, you would build it to specifically take some of that pain away to increase your enterprise value and get a better sale price later.
Right. Yep. Totally agree. Well, switching gears just a little bit here.
Please.
What are some common mistakes that you see MSP owners making as they try to scale the business or scale their business?
Well, we've talked about a couple of them already, and I don't want to keep beating that horn, but if they're the only sales engine, meaning that they're the reason when they go out and they're the networking guru and that's all that's being done, that's probably one place that I'd say that's a mistake. It might not be an intentional mistake or even one that I would criticize. It's just saying, okay, now we've observed that that's true. We've got to build something else that takes that situation back to having a sales engine, or at least a couple other people that can be partial part of it. Because ultimately what it means is that they can never take that hat off. And so when you're always chasing a next sale, how much work can you do on your business, especially if you can't focus on it because the next proposal needs to be shipped out by Thursday, or otherwise we're not going to get it. That's very distracting. So it's just a matter of you just can't pay attention to that many things. That's a lot of spinning plates in the air. The other problem I see is just making the assumption that everybody on your team cares as much about your business as you, and not paying any attention to the actual culture. Meaning There needs to be friendships. Yes, you do not have to be their best friend, your technician's best friends, but you've got to be present enough to know how do you build a true culture around your core values. And that's something the operating systems all focus on. What are your core values? Why are you here? It doesn't have to be woo woo rah rah, but it's got to be at least intentional enough that they can get behind it before they're hired. Or if you've already hired them and you institute some of these things like core values that they contributed to it, and then like offered their opinions and they got internalized. It's just so much more fun to be part of an organization that actually cares what you're saying. Those are missing components, I think, that MSP owners think, well, why wouldn't, I'm writing the check, why won't they be okay with that? It's like, well, that is not exactly how teams work, but I like where your head's at. Let's try to drive forward. But we've got to have a way to bring them together. So missing the culture, and I know, again, it doesn't have to be woo-woo and totally, kumbaya, but it's got to be, how do you pay attention to it? And then how do you make sure that you have consistent sales growth that doesn't just depend on the owner? Those are mistakes that I see repeatedly.
Right. Yeah, and I think that the opposite is true with culture as well, which is that if the owner isn't setting direction on culture, then the employees are going to create their own culture, which then ends up in in all likelihood, a culture that a buyer isn't going to find overly attractive. That culture is sort of lack of accountability, no real kind of oversight, and it is a question that certainly we experience from buyers, which is someone, and it's not necessarily every buyer that will ask, but hey, Kevin, tell me a little bit about the culture of your business. How would you describe your office environment, or if everybody's working remotely, what does that environment look like? And certainly as a business owner, I don't think you want to be caught off guard. You want to have an answer to that, and a intentional answer to that question, right? That there was a specific intended culture that was created, and the artifacts that are part of that culture, and explain them. So
that's the beauty. I'll interrupt you, but that's the beauty of EOS, is that it forces you to do it. It might be, whatever quarter you decide to attack that, is that you will have that defined, and then you'll start to roll it out throughout the organization, and you can reference it to other people and say, well, EOS is the system we use. Our culture is built on these 5 values or 7 values, and this is our focus. And that is to the point that your team can take it in and internalize it, and you can reiterate it when you have quarterly conversations with them, or just feedback to your own individual employees. That is the culture you can show. If you have no plan and you have nothing written, that is probably far scarier to a buyer than even a culture that isn't the same as their own. At least they had a culture, and we can talk about what the similarities, map against your culture versus our ideas of culture. We do have similarities. We just call them different things. That's way easier to do, and so I would encourage spending some time on that, even if it's just 90 days worth of time. Spend a little time working on that piece of your business.
Yeah, totally agree. Good. Well, when we look at talking about whether it's a buyer or a seller, one of the first questions is how much my business is worth, and I mentioned that earlier. And I've had today's Tuesday, and so far I've had this question twice this week, which is to talk about valuations and what moves the needle in terms of valuations and getting a higher multiple. And so without question, everybody understands that profitability is going to be a factor, right? Profitability is sort of a proxy for EBITDA, if you like, and that there's the concept of the multiple. So multiple times the EBITDA figure will give you a valuation. What in your work do you see as important things for an MSP to focus on to help them improve the profitability? Because they may not be able to improve the multiple without a lot of other meaningful changes to the business, like we talked about reliance on the owner. The biggest driver of valuation from a multiple perspective is actually the size of the business. So, that's fine. You will get more business, but that's not something you can do overnight. But improving profitability may be something that is to some degree a bit of low-hanging fruit. And there's a lot that could be done there. But what do you see that MSPs can kind of do to increase profitability, other than, of course, just raising their prices?
Sure. Repricing is important. And I think that it's especially important around people that spend a lot of time concerned with, their tech came out of this. As the ownership class came out of being a technician themselves, they have a deep care for the people they're serving, because they were serving them before there was even a business, in the sense that it was like, there was employees involved. They probably grew it from one to some number above one, 100 or whatever. And so that they have a real kinship. They may have too close a kinship to that price point, because they're afraid that if I raise price, XYZ Corporation is going to leave us, because they've always told us our prices are already kind of high. So I'm going to be cautious about that. So I would challenge that. Is obviously raising prices is important, but not just categorically, but finding what things are most profitable, which clients are calling in the most, who needs prices raised, do we maybe need to lose them and go find a replacement logo for them? That's separate, and that's not what you asked about. But I think it's super important that we at least acknowledge that's in the room.
Well, I think losing clients is definitely a factor, right? Is tiering your clients and then figuring out which ones that, particularly if you're not making any money on them, it doesn't make sense to keep them unless there's some kind of logo that you're married to that's adding value. But otherwise, keeping those low profitable customers, or maybe even losing money on those customers, that doesn't make any sense. So I think that is a very relevant piece, certainly.
Yeah. And so the alternative of profitability looks like, what are you actually doing for the things you do in your business? Okay, so you've spent time in leadership team meetings, and is anyone actually proactive in finding new ways, either new revenue streams, et cetera, not just new logos, but like, how do we actually deliver the things that we deliver to our customers? And is that going to allow us to raise prices, but not just because we're raising prices? Are we actually adding bigger value? Are we specialized enough? I think that has a big thing, a big impact on valuations. That doesn't speak directly to profitability on its own, but if you're specialized for one, I have a client that's specialized in construction, and they know specific things their clients use, their software that no one else would know, no other MSP would know. And if they can tune their offerings to those kinds of softwares, they can speak a language at a level that no one else can speak, even though there's competitor MSPs just down the block from them that have also interviewed this particular client and put their foot in the door. I think that specialization allows you to raise prices later over time, but not raise prices just because. It's because you're actually adding value, and you have to be deep enough on that niche to actually know how to add value. I think that is a piece that implies profitability in my mind, and goes hand in hand with what your work is. How do you get more out of a sale? Is looking more attractive, is being able to speak a language and laser focused on certain things. It doesn't have to be just one industry. It could be 2 or 3 or 4, but please find a way to speak their language, the language of your customer. Because if it's just the generalized stuff that's coming out, we help support IT needs.
Yeah.
No, that's just a commodified thing, and anybody else that says the same thing, they're just going to compare price to price and make sure they're going to just find the lowest seat price. So then you have no value.
Yeah, look, I mean, I made this decision a long time ago with specializing in IT services. So, I appreciate, those comments as well from, a personal perspective, and not to sort of pat ourselves on the back, but it's nice for us to be able to say, I know nothing about that, but I do know lots about this. and I'm okay with that, because it makes the conversation very easy, and I'm not having to pretend that I know something that I don't know. And it, when we were speaking, I had a client yesterday, I guess it was, and he was complimenting me on how much knowledge I had in the space. And so they sort of throw out terms like I don't know. They'll talk about something like ConnectWise. I don't know if you've ever heard of that company, right? And it's as if they would expect that I would have never heard of them, right? And so it's nice when we can add value and kind of make the links. But this idea around specializing, and then the profitability will follow. Prices can increase. I really like that. I think the other thing that's important there is the stickiness factor, right? Is that you won't have the same degree of churn, because the opportunity for those customers to leave you and go somewhere else is a lot less, because now they got to go find someone who's even if they're cheaper than somebody else is cheaper, if they don't have the degree of specialization and understanding of your industry, construction industry, as you mentioned, that you do, it's going to be difficult for somebody else to take that over and do as good a job, and in some cases they might bounce back to you, if that's the case. So I think it's those are all good points.
And the last piece I'll say is that this truly goes from my heart to every visionary entrepreneurial person in the world, is just the more that you can learn to speak those languages to that group, the quicker you can get to a sale. And that is true profitability. It doesn't look like raising the price profitability. It's if you don't have to say the same thing 70 times, you can say it only 4 times and get a yes, then you're ahead of the game. Then you only have to say it 4 times to get a yes instead of 70. Like, that's 70 meetings before a yes happens versus 4. That's a big difference. And that is profitability over time. And that is a way that you can extract yourself from an owner-led sales organization, is that if you say it's so good that no one else can deny it, then the probability that someone that's similar to your existing client base, who is a construction person, for example, in this case, would buy from you is high, because you just show them your competitors are using us.
Right.
If you want to go do your own thing with a different MSP, that's fine. I'm just showing we've solved this very specific problem, and we help them with this use case. If you have that use case too, you could try to explain it to somebody else, or you could just we could just take you from 0 to 60 right now. You're there. Right? Is that attractive? And that's so much less conversation. That's so many, less hours in the discovery phase, and from, the decision makers waiting and hemming and hawing over your proposal.
Yeah. Totally agree. Good. Well, I've got, Kevin, if you got a couple more minutes, I've got 2 more questions here, and then we'll wrap up. One of the questions that I wanted to ask you was related to private equity. No secret that private equity has come into the space. It's not a new thing, but it's certainly, I would say, growing as a proportion of buyers. On the other hand, one of the questions that I get is who are private equity firms interested in? And the first thing is that from a revenue perspective and profitability or EBITDA perspective, they have their criteria. And if you're too small, frankly, you just got to wait. You got to grow to be attractive to them. We typically see $1 million as being the threshold below which private equity groups are not interested. But as a tuck-in, not a platform business, but as a tuck-in, sometimes they'll dip down to sort of $500,000 in EBITDA. But at the same time, I've also had private equity groups that 2 million is their bare minimum. But let's just sort of push the number aside. So let's just say that from a numbers perspective, an EBITDA number is you're at that point to attract private equity. What else are private equity firms looking for from your perspective, other than those EBITDA numbers?
I'm so glad you asked, because I literally took it from their mouths and said, I will just apply this to a business that's much smaller than that. So, like, say, gross revenue of $1 million. Concentration of clients in a certain industry is important, but not explicitly all in the same. You can't have none that are outside of that. But also the specialization provides an ability to have good price points, at least margin price points, and then making sure you're competitive in your peers with your seat price and things. Because if you're too low and they want to purchase or do a tuck-in, they wouldn't approach someone that's so much lower, like at 25% or lower, because they're going to turn around and go, well, all of our portfolio companies or our current business, acquisitions are looking like this. We couldn't turn around and raise those prices immediately.
Right.
So a private equity might send someone to me, for example, for 6 to 18 months and go, hey, let's let's do a very slow raising the prices. Let's make sure that there's reoccurring increases in the 3-year contracts, and it's every year, it's always X%. Those things are very attractive to buyers at the level of private equity.
Yeah, yeah, great. Last question I had for you here that I wanted to talk a little about for the last few minutes is kind of the big picture from a mindset perspective. How should MSP owners make a shift, in their mindset as they grow their business, as they need to kind of wrap their heads around some of these changes that are needed? What are your thoughts there?
Again, read the book Traction. Go way back in history if you're a history buff. Read E-Myth. They're short books. They go quick. They're very much told in kind of like a novel story. There is a through line of a story, so it's easy to get through it. Start acting instead of just like a technician. Now, you may always have to be a technician. You may always be level 4, the highest tier of expertise, but start acting like the business owner. And a business owner would not allow their highest paid employee to be changing the light bulbs. And I'm going as, obtuse as possible, but stop going out there and scooping the snow. Like, if these are things that other humans can do at a price point that is not your price point, please allow them to do that. Maybe not tomorrow, and maybe not, fully by the end of, the calendar year, but start making a plan for how do you use your time to the highest level and leverage your superpower, because you're wasting so much extra effort on things that don't need to be done that someone else can do, and especially if it's about trust. If you don't trust someone to do it, why are they on your team at all? And that's just a challenge. That it's a mindset shift, and it's not something that people easily do, especially when they've been running the business for 20 years and they've always done it this way. And no one can do it quite as good as I can, so I just do it. That's their mentality. It's like, that's great, but eventually you're going to have to turn this over, whether it be to someone that buys it at a multiple that you love and you celebrate and take your wife out with, or your husband and you go crazy with. That's great, but if you're still doing this stuff at the bottom level, there's no way anyone's interested in buying your business. And so you're impacting your enterprise value. That would be my encouragement, to change your shift your mindset.
Yeah, one of the exercises that I've gone through a few times is the idea in terms of to justify that, or the flip side, which is, well, this is just easier, I'll just do it myself. And how do you go through that is to say, well, this is easier to just do it myself. This will take me 2 minutes to do it. But how often are you doing that 2 minutes? If you're doing that 2 minutes every day, then that's 2 minutes every day times 365 days a year is, 700 and some odd minutes of time. How long will it take you to train someone to do that, and for them to be good at it? And yes, the payoff might be just like, as a buyer of a business, the buyer's not going to pay the business off and have an ROI in a year or 6 months. Probably going to be a few years, but in this case, it's probably, I think you'd be surprised if you do the math in a lot of cases that it's not actually that long, and then you free yourself up for focusing on the things that are important. Look, Kevin, thank you so much. I think this was a great session. I'm hoping that everybody got a lot of value out of it. Kevin and I agreed to wear blue shirts today, so to align ourselves. Next time we're going to both wear red shirts. Next session that we do, but anyhow,
twins,
exactly. If you have any questions, for Kevin, how can people reach you?
You can just go to kevinhagemoser.com. Maybe that could be in the show notes. The last name's not easy to spell, so we'll put it somewhere. And you can find me, Kevin Hagemoser, on LinkedIn, and just reach out to me there. That's the best places right now.
Sounds good. We'll add that, and also you can obviously reach out to us, and we can connect you with Kevin as well. So hope everybody got value, and thank you very much, Kevin. I'll sign off. We'll sign off. Take care.
Thank you. It's been wonderful. I appreciate your time so much today.